All right, so buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving headfirst into one of the most chilling and enduring mysteries out there, the Dyatlov Pass incident. Picture this. It's 1959, the heart of the Soviet Union, and 9 experienced hikers, young and adventurous, they set off into the Ural Mountains. But here's the catch. They never come back. And when the search party finally finds them, the scene is straight out of a nightmare. A tent ripped open from the inside, bodies scattered across the frozen landscape, some barely clothed. And get this, some with injuries that defy explanation.
Yeah, it's the kind of case that sticks with you, you know? It just makes you wonder what could have possibly happened out there in the middle of nowhere.
And the official explanation, a compelling natural
A
force.
compelling natural force. That's what they
Oh.
came up with. It's like saying they died because something really strong happened.
Well-
Well, no kidding.
Right. It's as vague as it gets, and that's precisely why this incident has become a breeding ground for theories. Avalanches, military cover-ups, even Yetis.
Oh, yeah, the Yeti theory. Gotta love those. And, you know, given the whole Cold War era and the Soviets' penchant for secrecy, it's no wonder those wilder theories took off.
Exactly. So we're going to try to sift through all the noise. We're going to look at eyewitness accounts, official reports, and even some recent scientific studies to see if we can make any sense of this.
We've got to try.
We have to. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's start with the basics. Who were these hikers?
Well, we're talking about a group of 10 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, led by a guy named Igor Dyatlov. They were experienced, well-equipped, and ready for a challenge.
So not exactly amateurs wandering into the wilderness.
No, these guys were serious about their hiking.
And their goal.
A 16-day, 190-mile ski expedition through some of the most unforgiving terrain the Urals has to offer.
190 miles. That's quite a trek.
It was. And to make it even more challenging, they were aiming for a Category 3 expedition, the most difficult level. So they were pushing their limits, testing themselves against the element.
Now, initially, things seemed to be going smoothly. They kept diaries, they took photos, and their spirits were high.
From what we can gather, they were enjoying the adventure.
But then things take a turn. One of the hikers, Yuri Yudin, gets sick and has to turn back early.
Yeah, little did he know he just dodged a bullet. He became the sole survivor of the expedition.
It's chilling when you think about it.
It really makes you think about how fragile life can be, especially in those kinds of environments.
Absolutely. And when the hikers were supposed to send a telegram from the village of Vizhai, crickets, nothing. Weeks go by, no word from them. And so a search party is sent out. What they found on the slopes of this mountain, Kholat Sekal, which translates to dead mountain, by the way, is what truly sent chills down everyone's spines.
It was like something out of a horror movie.
Can you describe the scene?
The tent was the first thing that really struck them. Half buried in the snow, but ripped open from the inside,
Ripped open from the inside.
as if someone was frantically trying to claw their way out.
Okay, so this wasn't just a leisurely packing up and leaving.
No, something made them run for their lives.
And inside the tent?
Everything was relatively neat and organized. Boots, clothes, equipment, even food sliced on a plate, like they were interrupted in the middle of a meal.
Frozen in time.
Exactly. And that's just the beginning. As the search continued, they started finding the hikers' bodies,
Scattered across the landscape.
some as far as a mile from the tent.
And that's when things went from unsettling to downright horrifying.
Let's just say the condition of the bodies was not pretty.
We're talking about 6 hikers who died from hypothermia, which, given the freezing temperatures, isn't entirely surprising. But 3 of them had injuries that just didn't make sense.
Yeah, major skull damage, severe chest trauma, and one even had a cracked skull.
That's not something you get from simply freezing to death.
Nope. And then there were the 4 bodies they found in a creek. 3 of them had extensive damage to the soft tissues of their heads and faces.
What does that even mean?
We're talking missing eyes, missing tongue, even missing eyebrows in some cases.
That's starting to sound less like an accident and more like something truly sinister. Did the autopsy shed any light on this?
They did, and they didn't. They provided more details, but honestly, more questions as well.
Like what?
Well, for example, one of the hikers, Doroshenko, had a blunt force injury. Another, Krivonyshenko, seemed to have bitten off part of his own knuckle and had third-degree burns. And Dyatlov himself had vomited blood.
These are gruesome details.
They are. And then there's Kolmogorova, another hiker who had a strange bruise on her waist.
It's like a puzzle where the pieces just don't fit.
Right. You've got experienced hikers fleeing their tent in a panic, bizarre injuries, and a Soviet investigation that was shrouded in secrecy.
And to add fuel to the fire, they found traces of radiation on some of the clothing.
Radiation.
Radiation.
Talk about a curveball. That's the kind of detail that really sends the conspiracy theorists into overdrive.
I can imagine.
What in the world was radioactive out there in the Ural Mountains?
Right. Was this some kind of secret military operation gone wrong? Or a nuclear accident they were trying to cover up?
Who knows? But we'll get to those theories soon enough.
Before we go down that rabbit hole, there's one more piece of this puzzle we need to talk about. The cedar tree.
The cedar tree?
The cedar tree.
Ah, yes. That's where things get even weirder, if that's even possible.
So tell us about it.
Well, near the base of this cedar tree, investigators found a makeshift fire. And huddled around it, they found the bodies of two hikers, Yuri Krivonyshenko and Yuri Doroshenko. But here's the thing. They were only wearing their underwear.
Underwear in sub-zero temperatures? That's insane.
It's one of those details that just makes you scratch your head.
Mhm.
And to make things even stranger, branches on that cedar tree were broken as high as 5 meters.
Someone or something had been climbing that tree?
Were they searching for something? Trying to signal for help? Or maybe, just maybe, they were desperately trying to get away from something down below.
All right, so we've got a slash tent, bizarre injuries, radiation, and a desperate climb up a tree. What did the official investigation conclude?
They said it was death by a compelling natural force.
A compelling natural force? That's incredibly vague, don't you think?
You could say that again. And to make matters worse, the case was closed pretty quickly, all the records were sealed, and access to the area was restricted.
So basically, they didn't want anyone snooping around.
It's almost as if they were hiding something.
I mean, that's just asking for conspiracy theories to run rampant.
Oh, absolutely. And run rampant they did.
And that's what we'll be getting into next. We'll explore some of the most popular explanations for the Dyatlov Pass incident, from natural disasters to military cover-ups, and maybe even a few out-of-this-world possibilities.
You know I love the out-of-this-world stuff.
Stay tuned. Okay, so we've set the stage for this chilling mystery, and now it's time to dive into the theories, the explanations that people have come up with to try and make sense of what happened out there on Dead Mountain. And let me tell you, there's no shortage of ideas.
Oh, there are plenty, that's for sure. Some more plausible than others.
Right. But let's start with the more, let's say, grounded explanations. What are some of the leading natural theories for the Dyatlov Pass incident?
Well, one that's gained a lot of traction, especially in recent years, is the avalanche theory.
The avalanche theory. So basically a massive wall of snow just slammed into their tent.
Pretty much. You gotta remember, their tent was found on a slope, and researchers believe that a slab avalanche, which is a particularly dangerous type of avalanche, could have hit them.
Now, these hikers were experienced, right? Wouldn't they have been aware of the risks of an avalanche, especially in those mountains?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But slab avalanches can be tricky. They can be difficult to predict, and the combination of the terrain, the strong winds, and maybe even the placement of their tent could have created a perfect storm for this to happen.
I see. So it's not just about knowing the general risks of avalanches, but also understanding the very specific conditions of that location. Now, I can imagine the chaos of an avalanche hitting your tent in the middle of the night.
Oh, it would be terrifying.
But would it explain those horrific injuries we talked about? The skull fractures, the chest trauma?
It's definitely possible. Being caught in an avalanche, you're being tossed around by tons of snow, ice, and debris. You could easily be slammed against rocks and trees with incredible force.
That's a grim thought.
Yeah, it's not a pretty picture.
So the avalanche could explain the initial panic, the damaged tent, and maybe even some of the injuries. But what about those hikers who were found so far away from the tent? Some of them were barely clothed. Why would they wander off into a blizzard like that?
That's where hypothermia comes in.
Right. We talked about how 6 of them died from hypothermia.
Well, hypothermia can do strange things to the body.
Like what?
Well, it can cause confusion, disorientation, and even something called paradoxical undressing.
Paradoxical undressing. What in the world is that?
It's a phenomenon where people suffering from severe hypothermia start taking off their clothes.
Wait, what? They're freezing to death, but they take off their clothes.
It sounds crazy, but it's true. Their body's internal thermostat is basically malfunctioning. The blood vessels constrict to try and conserve heat, but this can create a false sensation of burning heat, leading them to believe they need to cool down.
Oh, wow, that's terrifying.
It is. And tragically, it's often a sign that the person is nearing the final stages of hypothermia.
So they're freezing, but their body is telling them they're overheating.
Exactly.
And in that state of confusion, they might wander off trying to find shelter or help, and then they just succumb to the cold.
It's a heartbreaking scenario, but it's one that could explain why some of those hikers were found so far from the tent and without proper clothing.
So the avalanche theory, combined with the effects of hypothermia, paints a pretty bleak picture.
It does.
But are there other natural explanations that might fit?
There's the infrasound theory.
Infrasound.
Yeah, it's kind of out there, but it's interesting. Basically, the idea is that strong winds interacting with the mountain terrain could have generated infrasound waves.
Infrasound waves.
These are sound waves that are below the range of human hearing.
So we can't hear them.
Nope. But our bodies can still sense them, and some researchers believe they can have a pretty powerful effect on us.
Like what?
Well, some people believe that exposure to infrasound can cause feelings of anxiety, panic, even hallucinations.
So it's like the silent terror that you can't escape.
Exactly. Imagine being in this remote, desolate location, the wind is howling all around you, and suddenly you're overcome with this sense of dread and impending doom, but you can't pinpoint the source.
That would mess with your head.
Oh, for sure. And some research even suggests that infrasound can cause physical symptoms like nausea, dizziness, and disorientation.
So in that state, I could see how you might do some pretty irrational things.
Like slashing your way out of your tent and running out into a blizzard.
Exactly. But has infrasound ever been proven to cause these kinds of extreme reactions?
It's still a relatively new area of research, so the jury's still out on that one. There's no concrete evidence that infrasound caused the Dyatlov Pass incident. But it's a theory that some people find compelling.
I can see why. All right, so we've got some natural explanations. An avalanche, infrasound, both pretty terrifying in their own right. But what about those details that hint at something more deliberate? The radiation on the clothing, for example.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting and a bit more sinister.
Let's talk about the theories that involve human actions.
Okay, so we're venturing into conspiracy theory territory now.
Bring it on.
One of the most popular theories is that the hikers stumble upon some kind of secret military operation.
Like a weapons test.
Exactly.
And the Soviet government silenced them to cover it up.
That's the idea.
I mean, it's not entirely far-fetched when you consider the Soviet Union's history of secrecy, especially during the Cold War.
Right. They weren't exactly known for their transparency.
And there's the Kishtim disaster to consider.
The way?
The Kishtim disaster. It was a nuclear accident that happened in the same region just a few years before the Dyatlov Pass incident.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, it was a big cover-up. So some people believe there might be a connection.
I could see how they'd make that leap.
But wouldn't a military operation, especially one involving something like a weapons test, leave more evidence behind?
You'd think so. But if it was a top-secret mission, they might have been very careful to clean up after themselves.
And we're talking about the Soviet Union here.
Exactly. People didn't just go around talking about government secrets.
Right, you kept your mouth shut if you knew what was good for you.
So while there's no smoking gun, so to speak, the possibility of military involvement is still intriguing.
It definitely adds another layer to this whole mystery. Now, what about other human-caused explanations? Was there any conflict with indigenous people in the area?
Some people have suggested that, yeah. Maybe the hikers angered or offended a local tribe and things escalated.
But that seems a bit far-fetched, doesn't it?
It does. There's no real evidence to support it, no signs of a struggle, no missing equipment, and no reports of any conflict between the hikers and the indigenous population in the area.
So we can probably rule that one out. Okay, so we've covered natural disasters, military conspiracies, and even potential clashes with locals. Is there anything else? I mean, with a mystery this strange, there's got to be some more, let's say, unconventional theories floating around out there.
Oh, you know there are.
I was hoping you'd say that.
We can't talk about the Dyatlov Pass incident without at least mentioning the paranormal theories.
All right, this is where things get fun.
Right.
Hit me with them. Yetis. UFOs. Give me the good stuff.
Well, you've got your Yeti attacks, of course. Alien abductions are always a popular one. And then there are the theories about strange, unexplained energy fields in the region.
I gotta admit, I love a good paranormal theory.
They're entertaining, that's for sure.
But is there any evidence to support any of these claims?
Honestly, not really. No footprints, no credible sightings, no mysterious lights in the sky. As much as we might want to believe, the paranormal theories just don't hold up when you look at the facts.
Okay, so we've explored a lot of different explanations, from the scientifically plausible to the downright outlandish. After all of this, what are your thoughts? Is there one explanation that stands out as the most likely?
It's tough to say for sure. The avalanche theory, especially when you factor in the effects of hypothermia, seems to fit a lot of the evidence. The damaged tent, the injuries, the scattered bodies. It makes sense.
But even that theory doesn't explain everything.
It doesn't.
What about those details that just don't seem to fit anywhere? The missing eyes and tongue, the radiation.
Those details are the real head-scratchers. They keep this case alive. They make you wonder if there's something more to this story than we currently understand.
Absolutely.
And then there's the whole thing with the blanket.
Oh, yeah, the blanket.
That's a weird one.
What is that all about?
So there were these unconfirmed reports of a blanket being found at the scene, possibly covering some of the bodies under the cedar tree.
A blanket. Where would a blanket even come from out there in the middle of nowhere?
That's the million-dollar question. Nobody knows for sure if the blanket was actually there or where it could have come from.
It almost sounds ritualistic, like something out of a horror movie.
It definitely adds a creepy element to the whole thing. But we have to take it with a grain of salt. It's an unconfirmed detail, just a rumor, really. It's possible it's a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation of what was found at the scene.
Okay, so a lot of theories, a lot of speculation, but ultimately still a lot of unanswered questions.
That's the Dyatlov Pass incident for you.
It's a mystery that continues to fascinate and frustrate us all these years later.
It's a case that reminds us that we don't have all the answers, and maybe we never will.
Maybe that's part of the appeal,
Maybe
the not knowing, the mystery of it all.
it keeps us coming back for more.
It does. Well, we've talked a lot about the theories, but we haven't really touched on the specific conditions those hikers faced. I mean, those mountains are brutal, especially in winter.
They are.
So in our next segment, we're going to dive into the geography and the weather conditions of the Dyatlov Pass region and see how those factors might have played a role in this tragedy. Stick with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Dyatlov Pass incident. We've explored the chilling details, the theories, the speculation. But now it's time to take a closer look at the setting of this mystery. The Ural Mountains.
Right, we got to talk about the environment these hikers were in. The Dyatlov Pass area, it's known for its beauty, sure, but also its brutal winter conditions, especially in February when this tragedy happened.
And so paint us a picture. What was the weather like out there?
Imagine this. Heavy snowfall, winds that can knock you off your feet, and temperatures that can drop way below freezing. We're talking bone-chilling cold.
The kind of cold that can kill you pretty quickly.
Like, yeah. Hypothermia and frostbite are a real danger in those conditions.
And then you factor in the wind chill. It makes it even worse.
It sounds absolutely brutal.
It is.
And then the terrain itself, it's pretty challenging, right?
Oh, it's treacherous.
Yeah.
Steep slopes, rocky outcrops, limited visibility. It's not a place for the faint of heart.
And remember, their tent was found on a slope, which, as you mentioned earlier, could have made them more vulnerable to an avalanche.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. You might find some shelter from the wind on a slope, but you also increase the risk of being hit by a slab avalanche.
It's like nature itself was working against them.
In a way, it was.
And from what I understand, the weather on the night of the incident was particularly bad.
It was. Reports indicate temperatures ranging from -10 degrees C to a staggering -32 degrees C, with constant snowfall and strong winds throughout the night.
I can't even imagine trying to survive out there in those conditions.
It would be nearly impossible, especially if you weren't properly dressed.
Which, of course, brings us back to the mystery of the partially clothed bodies.
Yeah, that's one detail that's always bothered me.
It's just so strange.
It is. But as we talked about earlier, paradoxical undressing could be a factor.
Right, where hypothermia causes people to feel like they're burning up, even though they're freezing to death.
It's a cruel trick of the mind.
It makes you wonder if those hikers, in their disoriented state, wandered off in different directions thinking they needed to cool down.
It's definitely a possibility.
And it just adds another layer of tragedy to this whole story.
It does.
They were experienced hikers, they knew the mountains, and they knew a storm was coming.
They did.
In fact, Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader, was specifically warned about the dangerous weather conditions.
That's right. A forester named Rempel from a nearby village, he cautioned Dyatlov about the strong winds that were common in the area during winter. He even advised them to wait for better conditions before continuing their expedition.
So they knew the risks, they understood the power of nature, and yet they still went out into that storm.
It's baffling.
Why?
It's the question that has haunted this case for decades.
Was it overconfidence? A miscalculation of the storm's severity?
Or was there something else, something we haven't considered, that drove them from their tent that night?
It's a mystery.
It is.
Perhaps the avalanche theory holds the answer.
It's possible. A sudden, unexpected avalanche could explain their desperate flight.
But even that doesn't explain everything.
It doesn't.
We still have those unexplained injuries, the radiation, the missing eyes and tongue.
Those details, they linger. They make it hard to settle on any one explanation.
So after all this time, all the investigations, all the theories, we're still left with a profound sense of mystery.
I think that's the nature of the Dyatlov Pass incident. It's puzzle with missing pieces, and we may never have all the answers.
It's frustrating in a way, but it's also kind of fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
It forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge.
To acknowledge that there are things in this world that we may never fully understand.
What do you think happened out there on Dead Mountain?
I honestly don't know. And I don't think anyone does for sure.
But we've laid out the evidence, explored the theories, examined the environment. Now it's your turn to dive deeper. Consider the possibilities, draw your own conclusions, check out the source materials in the show notes, and let us know what you think. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the mystery alive.